Great to be with you. Actually, the implementation task force has now ended, but I'm still on the executive steering group for Coalition S, guiding the plan and involved pretty much on a daily basis. So I'm happy to talk to you. I'm going to take it for granted that you generally know about Plan S. I'm going to talk as quickly as possible so there's more time for questions around the rights retention scheme, which is the newest bit of Plan S. And I'll also pass some comments about the open access review that UKRI is doing, which will lead to the implementation in the UK for UKRI grant holders, if that's okay. Do please ask questions and we'll see how that goes. So can I just pause and somebody say, yes, they're hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. So what's Coalition S about? Full and immediate open access. That's our catchphrase to publications from publicly funded research. You can, I guess, take it for granted that we can't achieve that without new models. Those new models have got to work pretty much across the world. So transparency, efficiency, fairness, support for young scholars, all necessary. And Coalition S, although it's a strong initiative from a group of funders, I've been to about 20 countries talking about it. I've talked to groups of all sizes and scales. It's a collaborative venture. And I've talked to most of the publishers on the planet in one meeting or another, some of them in very large meetings. It's been quite a big thing. The principles are pretty simple: no paywalls, no embargo periods. We picked up actually a substantial contribution from the UK, no copyright transfer, basically the SCL, the license that librarians have been pushing for in the UK for a while. Transparency, no doubt you all spotted the Nature announcement this week. That's given rise to, or last week actually, I think, that's given rise to loads and loads of comments. For me, it's about transparency, and it's a major success for one of the Plan S principles. We're not price capping, but we are supporting fees at a reasonable level. And of course, and I've got a slide, multiple routes to compliance. Lastly, and certainly not least, just been the subject of a Global Research Council meeting, the implementation effectively of DORA or similar stuff from Leiden about assessing research outputs on their content, not on where they're published. It is a worldwide initiative, and you see there particularly strong on the medical side with the Gates Foundation, Howard Hughes, and obviously Wellcome. And pretty decent coverage across Europe and going into quite a few countries elsewhere. There are 3 routes for compliance. The first column, open access publishing venues, are those open access journals that have been growing as part of the market for many, many years. I'm not going to go into the history. In the third column, we recognize that to move to open access, the OA 2020 and others have been pushing transformative agreements. We are partners with them. And also we've introduced the concept of transformative journals. Basically, the line is that we won't pay hybrid costs unless you're actually demonstrating that you're transitioning to full open access. And that relates to the Finch Group, which actually I set up in 2012-13 with Astrid from ESRC, which gave rise to a substantial increase in the amount of open access material, but at a considerable cost, which many refer to as double dipping. And quite simply, we're not playing that game again. So that's the transformative agreement is saying, you told us that APCs would lead to open access, now do it rather than talking about it while sequestering more money. very obvious that subscription routes are still popular in some countries, to which our answer is if that's the case, then our papers will be published open access, not in the version of record, although if publishers want to do that, that's great, but compulsorily the author accepted manuscript will be deposited. That's no different to what the REF policy has been since 2015, but no embargo, zero embargo. Fair to say the publishers are not keen on that because they don't think it's a sustainable business model. As it happens, I agree with them. But as long as their customers want subscription routes, then that's where we are. And the rights retention strategy that I'm coming to is intended to put that into effect, as with the scholarly communications license. And nicely, my screen has frozen for reasons that I do not know. Can somebody say something to me so that I know you're still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
You're still there, but
yes.
Hold on. Great. Just when I'm getting to the beef, my PowerPoint on my iPad has frozen. And I can't see you either, actually. Hold on. Still says I'm sharing. Right, I'm going to keep talking because the PowerPoint will be available and I don't want to waste your time faffing around with the annoying IT. The rights retention strategy is to ensure that our funding is made available open access without embargo with a CC BY license or by exception with ND. We understand that's occasionally necessary. It's to ensure that researchers basically can fund anywhere. What we're doing is providing the means for researchers to retain sufficient rights to be able to reuse their own work as they choose. And that encourages subscription publishers to develop transformative arrangements. The key question, the sort of argument that people put against Plan S was authors will not be able to publish anywhere. Part of that argument is sort of going away at a cost through initiatives such as Nature's, but this is intended to say to publishers, and we have said to publishers already, that our grantees will have signed, we're not there yet, grant agreements that require them to have retained the rights to put an AAM into repositories. And we are giving them notice that is the case. And we are asking them, if that is the case, will you then decline to accept outputs from Plan S funders? So we're putting the onus onto them to say they'll decline. So far, nobody has said that they will decline submissions from Plan S funders. Obviously, that is something that can happen. It has not happened. And in order to provide clarity to authors, we are providing a journal checker tool, which you can try now, and which, if my IT was working, I would be displaying to you now. With that journal checker tool, you indicate who your funder is. You indicate which journal you wish to submit to, and you indicate which institution you're in, because obviously transformative agreements are not necessarily signed by all authors, all institutions. And then it tells you whether you can publish through one of the existing routes, and if not, whether you have to fall back on the rights retention strategy and put an AAM in the repository. Now, we're giving notice so that there's transparency for authors, but there's also transparency for publishers on what the impact of their policy will be. And that's why we can say so far no one has told us that they will decline publications. And many, although I don't want to go into details there, have said that their motivation is to publish the best material they can. And clearly Plan S has a fairly prestigious group of funders from countries that provide publishers with good outputs. So there's no real motivation for them to do so. Clearly, this will play out in time. I'm just going to give one more go at getting this back, but it's being utterly resistant, so I'm sorry. I will push on. So the rights retention strategy is something we've told the publishers about. It will come into effect when in the UK, when the UKRI open access policy comes into effect. And that is not going to be, well, we've not announced the policy yet. We'll announce it in the early part of next year. I would guess that it's most unlikely to apply in the UK until the 1st of January 22, could be later. So there's still time. And of course, the rights retention strategy will be in operation in other countries, the Netherlands, for example, much sooner. And we'll be able to see what comes into play at that point. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to stop my video, start my video, share screen again, and have one more go at getting to it. Start broadcast. Haven't got, and I'm really sorry, but PowerPoint has just crapped out on my machine. So Journal Checker tool enables you to see now the consequences of your action. I'm just going to see if I can display not the Scrabble word finder, but the Journal Checker tool, which will let you see Journal Check. Can you see that, anyone?
Yes, we can.
Right, so let's pick one that I know works, the Journal of Theoretical Biology. I'm going to choose NWO as the funder because I'll explain why in a minute. And I'm going to choose being at Glasgow University, University of Glasgow. And it says, is this compliant with Plan S? Yes, this is compliant. And it explains the result. You asked us to calculate, and there you see the three things. And it says you're able to comply with Plan S via self-archiving. And it explains there how it came to that conclusion quite explicitly in the accompanying text. Now, you can all try that, journalcheckertool.org. So it's openly available. Let me just pause and see what I haven't said that I wanted to say. There's a whole lot of resources around that are in my PowerPoint, which you will have, obviously, to refer to later. There are questions. What happens if there's a disagreement with the author? And we'll provide support in communication with publishers if libraries can't manage that themselves. Have we tested the legal rights to retain copyright? Yes, we certainly have in the UK. I think it remains, of course, possible that publishers will choose to take action and say they don't agree with us. We'll manage that when it happens. We will ensure not only the publishers are told, they have been told that we're doing this, but they haven't been told formally, obviously, that it's implemented in the UK because the UK open access hasn't got there. And does it apply to everyone? We've contacted publishers who publish over 95% of the research attributed to Coalition S organizations. We will update our grant conditions and we'll notify publishers, we've done that, of their changes, but formally in due course. It remains the case that the preference in Plan S funders is for the version of record. We encourage people to enter into transformative agreements to make that happen. I did see a case yesterday, actually, where an institution said, "Why should we pay if we can make it available through the rights retention strategy?" My answer is, you're buying a service from a publisher, and you either get that service by subscription, which is why there's a rights retention strategy, or you get that service by paying essentially the APC. If you don't pay the service for the service, you don't get it. So I don't think this is a route to avoid paying. It's just a route to enable transition from one method of payment to another method of payment. I'm going to stop broadcasting, come back so that I can see your faces and take questions. You've referenced the likely start date. However, researchers receive funding from other bodies. There could be well, if they receive funding from other bodies, it's up to the other bodies. Yes, and welcome indeed. Welcome's been very open about what it's doing. And actually, I did have, although I took it out of the presentation, the welcome policy as an exemplar. I didn't think it was for me to say too much about welcome, but obviously they're very much at the heart of this, working with us. And I realize that the success of the whole Plan S initiative depends critically on the input from libraries, just as the previous REF and Research Council policy depended on a huge amount of work from librarians who did an absolutely brilliant job at considerable cost to their time. I think we're trying to minimize the time on this case, but yes, you do have to know the rules of the funders that your authors are using. Have we received any positive feedback from publishers re rights retention strategy, or just radio silence? Or certainly not radio silence. Certainly not. Generally, they're worried because they view it as a threat. They are generally keen to transition to open access. They want to minimize their risk, and this, they think, increases their risk. I understand that, but minimizing their risk in the end doesn't lead to change. And also they keep telling us that Coalition S funders are only a small, circa 7% of the total amount of published material. So their argument on the one hand is we can't change all of our systems because of 7% of publications. Well, equally in that case, you could manage, I'm afraid, 7% of publications where we're insisting on repository deposit. Will this create a two-tier system of OA, one for people who have funding and those who do not? It would be difficult for many non-funded academics to meet similar OA requirements via green. I'm not sure I understand the last sentence, but let me treat the two-tier system. This is, for a start, this is aimed from our funded users, but in the UK, obviously, it's aimed at universities because I'm part of, well, I'm a block grant funder in England, and with my partners in the devolved administrations, we provide the block grant funding for all of our universities. There are no, in my book, non-funded academics in universities. It's just the funding to do your research arrives from your university by a different route and charged against different budgets. As for those who are not part of any research organization that can support them, then I think if the funders want their outputs, and generally funders do want outputs, they'll provide routes to publish. And this is only one route to publish. There are many other diamond routes to publish, for example, that are open. And I think all authors have a range of choices for making the material available. I do think it's possible that some journals will price themselves out of the market, and that's been a topic of conversation. But that's a challenge, I think, for the journals, not so much for the author. Some transformative agreement proposals say nothing about the publisher committing to flip hybrid titles to full away during the span of should a university refrain from entering agreement. I think there's going to be a transitionary period. That is undoubtedly the case. And we've already seen CUP and Springer Nature commit to moving all of their journals to full and immediate open access, therefore denoting them as transformative journals. That means that, well, they are committing to flip. So you don't have to be part of a transformative agreement. You can commit to a journal stable. That does mean in 2024 they've got to deliver, and obviously we're looking forward very much to that. There are transformative agreements that don't include a commitment to flip yet, and at some point, yes, those will not become places where you can use our funding to fund the APC. But that's, you can fund, you can publish your material anywhere as long as you use the rights retention strategy to place a copy in the repository. And the whole point of our rights retention strategy is to tell publishers that is the case. So we have set it up so that authors can publish anywhere. Does the coalition see an issue with embargo periods for AAMs? Well, there aren't embargo periods for AAMs if a Plan S funder implements Plan S policy. So I can't discuss whether a Plan S funder does not implement Plan S policy. That's beyond my ken. We're actually technically not mandating copyright retention. Technically, we're mandating the right for an author to deposit a copy of the material. It's not technically copyright retention. We've done all the legal stuff. I do ask that a CC BY license is preemptively assigned to an AAM RRS in order to be funder compliant. I'm confused by the question, actually. From my point of view, it will be built into the grant agreements of Plan S funders, or alternatively, I absolutely accept that they will choose not to do that, in which case none of this applies. It's a different world, but not my world. Where Plan S funders implement the copyright retention policy, that includes CC BY, the publisher has been told it's pretty much as simple as that. I sort of feel it's frustrating not to be able to engage in conversation because I suspect you probably want to tease out some of those questions.
If anyone has any other questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions as well as putting things in the chat. But it doesn't look like we have any further questions at the moment. So obviously, if anyone thinks of something later, you can still pop that in the chat, and we'll monitor the chat, and we can bring these questions out as we go through the day. Thank you very much.
And I'm very happy. I'm very happy to receive any batch of questions and address them later on. My apologies that I've had a double IT crap out with my Microsoft Surface blowing up just immediately before, and then my iPad failing to reveal the PowerPoint from halfway through. I will send you the PowerPoint and you can circulate it.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right, we'll now move on to our next speaker. Fred Saunderson is the National Library, sorry, I'll put my camera back on, sorry. Fred Saunderson is the National Library of Scotland's intellectual property specialist, where he has responsibility for providing copyright and intellectual property advice and guidance, as well as coordinating licensing and reuse procedures. Fred is chair of the UK Libraries and Archives Copyright Alliance, and will talk about the responses to LACA's recent survey on COVID-19 and access to content. Fred, if you want to share your screen and your slides, I'll turn off my mic and let you present.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So hopefully all has worked and you can now see my slides.
We can.
Fantastic, good, good. One Microsoft Surface machine may yet hold out, we shall see. Fingers crossed. So yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for asking me to come along today and share some of this information with you. I'm really pleased to be able to do this. This is one of the first times we've been able to share some of this information. So I think it's really exciting to be able to do that for this group in particular. So just as a bit of background first, for those who don't know, so as we've said, I'm the chair of the Libraries and Archives Copyright Alliance. I'm the outgoing chair actually until the end of the year. And if you're not aware of LACA, just as a quick overview, we're an advocacy group. We've been working for over 30 years in the interests of those in the library and archive sectors, as well as their users, for fair and balanced copyright reform and copyright policies. And obviously we've been really proud to be involved in some of the really positive changes that have happened in UK copyright law over the last 30 years for our sectors, as well as sort of advocating in favour of things remaining positive in other areas. We are a representative organisation, a representative body, and we have members from a variety of organisations who are listed here, as well as individual copyright experts. And I see that a few of our members are on the meeting today, so that's great to see them. But the idea is we really try to be broadly representative of the full library and archive sectors. So we're not education or higher education library specific. We cover public libraries, special and research libraries, and research institutions, as well as archives and community groups as well. So online community groups or other sort of sections of the sector, museum archives, music libraries, and so on. So the idea is that they really try and cover a broad range of these two sectors. So the idea here is that in October, we ran a survey, an open call survey, and on the screen is what we said in our call to the survey on our website and the communications we put out. This is what we said we wanted to do, and I'll read that out in a second. But as a bit of background, the reason why we decided to run a survey in October was kind of twofold. First was we are always aware, and I think this is really important for everyone here, we're always aware that the most important things we can have as an advocacy group is evidence. So we try to have a lot of conversations. We do have a lot of conversations with government, with ministers and correspondents, responses to consultations as well, when those are open and call for views. Things that may seem very, very apparent in our daily working lives or our professional lives or even our personal lives are maybe very easy to talk about when we speak with those in the government, for example, because they're equally aware of them. But when it comes to advocating for real change, you need to have evidence. There needs to be something we can put down and say in hard numbers and give examples. So the most important thing we can have in any case is evidence and examples. And so we're always looking for opportunities to gather further evidence on almost whatever topic it might be in relation to copyright, because if there's not something happening about it right now, there might be in the near future, and we want to be able to call on that evidence. So evidence is really important. So that's the first reason why we wanted to survey. The second reason was that our sort of how we've been working to respond to the copyright aspects of the COVID situation, in particular the lockdown, and in particular, again, the closure for a period of certain libraries and archives, which have obviously closed across the UK in the spring and have variously closed in other locations since, due to local lockdowns. We communicated with, we drafted a letter together with a number of bodies, including SCURL, as well as, and this was led by RL UK, right at the end of March, at the start of the first lockdown. We wrote to the Secretaries of State for Education and for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, highlighting essentially the serious risks and problems that may come with the closure, the physical closure of libraries and archives during the lockdown, and the resulting lack in access to information, with a focus on the copyright aspects therein. So as a pure example, the idea that you might have a physical book in your collection and an inability to make that electronically available, even if you have the technological means to do so, remotely, that is. So we wrote to the ministers right at the beginning, just as a flag waving exercise, to say, look, we know that this is going to be a problem. Libraries and archives across the country are shutting, and this is going to reduce access. We had a response eventually from the minister responsible for copyrights in the BAYS, in the business department. And essentially the sort of response we would expect, thank you for your correspondence. These are the things we've done. We've got all these laws in place. We don't think that there's a huge problem that we can deal with at the moment. The response we'd sort of expect, and that's kind of what we'd expect at the start. We didn't have, we wrote right at the beginning, there was no evidence about the impact of what these closures would mean. Now, it might seem blindingly obvious to us what that impact would be, but there wasn't the evidence of it. It hadn't happened yet. And so by October, we thought it was appropriate, we thought it was the time to start gathering that actual evidence to say, right, what did happen? What were some of the challenges that was faced by the sector and obviously by extension, the users of the sectors? So that was the logic behind running our survey. We put this out in October, really to looking at, as I said here, access to information and a particular focus here in scholarly materials and libraries and archives, and sort of challenges that people faced. This was a completely open call for responses, an online forum that was very kindly hosted by RL UK. So we don't have a clear we didn't have any sort of control over, I guess, who responded. We didn't send it specifically to people and only allow them to respond. It was open. But looking at the data, I think we're reasonably confident that it's robust data. It is from the sort of people we'd expect to respond rather than being tampered with, which I wouldn't expect. But the other thing is to say, and I'll start to show you the results in a second, that it is obviously skewed. So as much as it's very important evidence and data, it comes from professionals in the sectors, and it comes from those individuals who, or those organizations that are particularly minded to engage with this. So it doesn't mean that the evidence we've got is all of the information that's available in the sectors, but nevertheless, it is accurate and true information. These are real experiences of people, and they really do count for something. This is really what is going on and what has been going on during the COVID pandemic. So I think it is really, really valuable information. What I'm going to now show you and talk you through for the rest of my presentation is the preliminary results of this survey, which I'm really excited that we've got. The survey was open for 1 month in October. We had about 112 results in total, responses in total. Obviously, some people didn't answer all of the questions, but it was about that number in total. I'm saying this is preliminary because what I do have is the responses for the straightforward yes, no, maybe type questions, the data. We also had 3 long answer questions, which I will come through in this survey. We received a huge amount of text from those, which is fantastic. That's what we wanted. That's where the real kind of interest and the stories come from. Those are hugely valuable. Real examples. This is the access I tried to get. This is what went wrong. Here's the money that was involved, and so on. The time frames involved, and that's really valuable information. But it's really really dense, and we have not yet had the full time to go through that properly and look for patterns and so on, and properly analyze the data. So there's a team of us who are now working on that within LACA, We're aiming to have first draft of sort of analysis of each of those 3 sections by the end of this month. Sorry, by the end of this year, which is this month. Oh gosh, by the end of this month, so that early in 2021 we can properly publish our full sort of findings here, which we will then be using more prominently, I guess, and more specifically in our advocacy efforts and our conversations with government, as well as perhaps with publishers and other parties. That all said, let's have a look at the results that we've got so far. So the first thing to say is who responded. 112 results, as I said. And as I said earlier, this is self-selecting. And you can see a huge skew here towards the library sector, as well as professionals from or who identify in other ways, and a much smaller, obviously, number of people who identify differently. The first question we asked of people was, so I'm just moving the bar where everyone else is so I can see this. During 2020 so far, have you tried to access information about COVID or related subjects, for example, public health? A fair number, a reasonable majority of respondents had tried to access this information. We wanted to ask this in particular because we've had quite a few responses from professionals working in the health system, so in health libraries. And I think those are really important examples and stories to be telling. And actually some of the data that I have sort of looked at and haven't properly analysed in the long answers I've looked at are some really interesting stories from those working in the health sector, struggling to access information during this pandemic. So this isn't just related to people working entirely unrelated subject fields that were kind of closed down, if you like, in that logic, and deprioritized from that public point of view. There were challenges being faced by people in the public health sphere, working on COVID even. So that's some really interesting information to get out. Then we asked people whether they tried to access any other form of published information. So unsurprisingly, almost everyone who responded had tried to access some other form of published information from books and journals, and a few people probably had only tried to access public health information. So I said no to this question. We then asked whether during 2020 anyone had been asked to provide or tried to obtain for themselves access to digital material specifically for teaching purposes. So again, 112 responses to this question, and a significant majority of people had been trying to access these resources for the purposes of teaching. So specifically trying to get digital resources for teaching. So again, it shows you what activities people were engaged with during this period and during the physical closure of facilities. And then this one is quite interesting. Unfortunately, the formatting here has removed some of the question, but I'll summarize what it is for you. During 2020, have you been asked to provide, or have you yourself tried to obtain access to digital materials for teaching purposes to use in place of or instead of physical materials? For example, have you tried to get an ebook license instead of using the paper book that you would have used beforehand? So this one is a little bit more interesting. You see the number go slightly down, but still a significant majority of people were actually trying to access materials in an e-context that they might previously have not tried to access in an e-context. So again, it's not surprising in the sense that you're seeing a shift to use of e-content when physical premises are closed. But this is what I mean by really helpful data for demonstrating what's going on in our sectors. This puts figures on the fact that yes, facilities were closed, and this is one of the results, that there was a massive shift towards trying to teach using completely different types of content. Now, this is the first question that we asked for long responses for. So we asked, what were the main sources that you used to get the information? Please provide details of the top 3 to 5 resources. We had 9 sources, sorry. We had 99 responses, so obviously not everyone responded, but quite a lot of people did. So this is one of the questions where we don't have the sort of full answers available for you yet. What I am showing you on the screen, I would caveat, is the most preliminary of anything I'm going to show you today. And this is a really rough sort of eyeball count of those sources that our respondents mentioned that came up more than 3 times, so in more than 3 responses. And they're shown for you there. I would give this complete caveat that this has not been analysed in any great detail. For example, to look to see whether multiple responses actually come from people in the same organization, in the same section of the organization, and whether we want to treat those differently, or for so other factors. And I might have missed things because it's eyeballing, but this is just to give you a sense of what people have been saying. So again, we've got some potentially useful information here about specific resources, trying to narrow the story down a bit. But we've got a lot more discursive information in this question, which is what we're really going to try and tease out next in terms of what people are actually, a lot of what people said here was not so much a list of sources, but a description of the problems that they faced. And that's what's really interesting, I think. So moving on to our next sort of data question. We asked people whether they felt that they were successful in obtaining these items of material that they actually wanted. Again, 111 responses here, so almost everyone responded. And this, I think, is a really interesting question. One of my, I think one of the ones that's most interesting, actually. So around 20% of the 111 people felt that they were, they can say, yes, I was successful in getting what I wanted. A very small proportion said they weren't successful, there was no success. But then a vast majority felt that they were partially successful. And that's what I think is really interesting here. The story that I feel like we're getting from this data and in more detail and in richer sense from the discursive text that we've got is that people are getting access to information. We're getting access to information despite the information access challenges and the copyright hurdles that people face. They were getting there, but it was very, very difficult and it wasn't completely satisfactory and they weren't getting everything. And this is important, I think, for the story we need to tell in an advocacy sense, that it isn't the case that copyright or the closure of physical premises has stopped all access to content. But it's maybe thrown in, spanners in the works in really challenging ways. It's meant that a vast majority of people who've looked for information in this example just weren't able to get what they needed. They got some, and maybe they got substitutes. The data responses will tell us more about what they actually achieved. But what we know is that they were only sort of partially successful. I think that's something we need to be really concerned about in 2020 in the UK. If we're only 111 information professionals, 77% of them were only partially successful in getting the content during a lockdown that they needed to get for their users, for themselves. There's something that's not right there. So then we asked, did you as the respondent or your institution have to pay money to get information that you wanted? Just interesting to understand here. This isn't usually surprising and maybe not problematic. We didn't ask, about whether you felt the money was excessive or damaging or anything, just whether you had to pay. A majority did, some didn't, and some weren't sure. That's pretty much as you'd expect. That's not hugely surprising, I suppose. But then there's another interesting one. Did you ever give up basically during this time trying to get that information because of cost or other access barriers? And again, this is probably one of the ones that is a most interesting question to look at the responses for. Nearly 82% of our respondents, 110 people, said that yes, they gave up at some point. And that ties back to 2 questions ago, to question 8 about, were you only partially successful in getting information? A lot of people reached a point where they just had to give up. There was a barrier to access in their way. Sometimes cost, but I think other barriers as well. And this is what we can get out of the discursive question. So a discursive question followed this. We asked a follow-up question to that. So if you said yes, well, please explain the problem. And this question, we've got a lot of rich information in. So we had 88 responses, but they're really detailed and they're quite lengthy. And this is really great. So this is people who said, yes, I had to give up trying to access information. I faced hurdles. I've been through this in really rough detail. As I said, we're waiting we're working through this to get the more substantive data, but the early themes that we can draw out of the responses to this, these are the areas that people kept highlighting as the barriers they were facing. So the first is that the simple expense of ebooks and e-journals. It was touched on before in the presentation before me, but these things cost a lot of money, a lot of times, for various reasons. But the straightforward, blunt, it costs a lot, we don't have the budget, obviously is a major citation. The second thing that kept coming up was a simple lack of availability in e-format, especially for core texts on academic programs. This is quite an interesting one. There was simply no e-format available a lot of citations are, well, I could get it on paper or I could get it in other, on physical media. It's not available as an e-format at all. Now that was really interesting, and this especially came up with materials that were not very, very, very current, if they weren't sort of this year's stuff. So that was quite an interesting point. But again, the highlight there is that the physical format was available. It's just the e-format. It's not that the content doesn't exist for these users. The third sort of theme that was coming out was that works were only available via an aggregator or a subscription or package. For example, people were saying they were essentially forced to purchase access to a great range of works in order to access the one desired work. Now, this is, again, is a really interesting example here. The complaint or the challenge here is not so much that users are the expense per se. It's the fact that now there is a need to access one e-resource, and oftentimes because they can no longer access the physical resource in the physically closed libraries or archives. The only way to get that one resource, or one or two, is via some subscription, essentially purchasing subscription to a much wider range of content than you actually require. Stuff you have no interest in, you don't need. You're looking for one or two items and you have to get the lot. And that obviously comes with a much bigger cost and restrictions. The fourth sort of theme that's coming out is restrictive license terms. Now, this is one that is really interesting from a copyright perspective. So coming back to what we are as an organization and what the logic of our conference is today, restrictive license terms, particularly the lack of multi-user licenses. A lot of citations coming up about the fact that, okay, maybe e-resources were available, but all that was available was consumer end products, one user at a time, or one user full stop licenses. And licenses that are priced accordingly. Essentially, the corollary of purchasing the book from Amazon. This is the idea that every single student in a course, for example, might purchase their own license for the ebook rather than have a library copy that they would access, which is quite a change. I think we can all agree from what you might expect in a physical resource sense. So that came up a lot. The challenge of getting licensing terms that suited the needs of the sector. And the last one, it was the price differences, the differential between what's charged for the print and what's charged for the e-format for individuals and the e-format for libraries. Sort of three price brackets: what a library would expect to pay for a physical book, what an individual would expect to pay for an ebook, or is priced for an ebook, and what the library is priced for an ebook. And sometimes the astronomical differences, quite frankly, between those three numbers, when actually, especially interestingly, the penultimate point there comes back again. And actually some of those e-formats for libraries were being cited as not particularly giving any better licensing terms. They maybe are not available for multiple users, and yet they're priced significantly higher than the print and e-format for individuals. So those are the themes that are coming out from question 10A about people who struggled or who sort of gave up finding content and the barriers that they face. But this is one that I think will have a lot more rich information to come in about a month's time. Finally, or nearly finally, we asked whether users had encountered any problems, and if they'd encountered problems, how often did they occur during the pandemic? I don't know whether we got the scale right here. It looks probably like we did. 98 responses, 1 to 2 times, 3 to 5, more responses than A for 11 plus. So unfortunately, we don't really have a great sense of how many more times than 11 that they got this, but nearly half of people who face these barriers were facing them more than 10 times, and a significant majority were facing them at least 5 times during the pandemic. And this, bearing in mind, this is really only the period from very end of March until sometime in October, depending on when they responded. So reasonably high numbers, especially given this is 98 people who were responding. To wrap this up, there were 2 further text-based questions that we asked people to respond to, 71 responses to each of them. I simply haven't been able to be through these in as great detail, so I don't have sort of highlights to share with you, but it's just to share what these questions were. We asked that if people encountered problems in accessing or disseminating the information they required, could they just elaborate further on the issues they encountered? Some of these responses are, from what I've looked at cursorily, a little bit just expansive of what they've responded in the previous question that I talked about. But there is new information here. Some people go into a lot more detail. So there's a lot of information we pull out there. And then the 13th question, just, anything else you want to tell us? And again, we got some more sort of stories and interesting highlights of information in that question. So there is a lot more rich information to be pulled out there. that's sort of what we've, in a really fly through what we've managed to pull out from that survey. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, anyone who is here, who was able to respond to that survey, who helped to amplify that survey and pass it around. I'm really pleased that we got the sort of level of engagement that we got in a short period of time. I think that's really telling about the pressing nature of this for the sectors and for users. We made the survey available via our website, which is uklacquer.org, and this is where we will be publishing our results. I'm hoping to publish a sort of basically the information I've given you today in a little, sort of lightweight information very, very soon on the website. And probably in January, we'll have a much more detailed publication going into more of the in-depth questions and analysis of those longer responses. So that was all I wanted to cover. I wanted to say thank you very much for your attention and for your help with this survey. I guess just to highlight finally that what LACquer is trying to do with this information next. This is, as I said, really, really valuable. We need evidence and we need stories if we're to advocate for change or to advocate against what we would see as regressive change. And we're sort of plotting our best course with this, and it kind of ties into what else is happening and where things are in the sectors. But we are considering whether it might be best we'll probably get together with some of our partners, for example, RL UK, who really helped us with the survey and who are members of LACquer, and look at whether we can have some conversations initially, maybe with some of the publishers of content or aggregators of content who are coming up here to sort of talk about these issues that have come up now that we've got some evidence. And we'll also, of course, be sharing this with the Intellectual Property Office, which is the government body responsible for this area. So essentially, we'll sort of move this into our advocacy phase. So again, this is really valuable. We can't make proper cases to government without the data. So I want to thank you again for any help that you've been able to provide here, and in advance for any future help you'll be able to provide to future surveys. So that's all I wanted to say. I will stop talking now, and I will obviously throw it open if there are any questions. I will stop sharing my screen as well. I've just seen there's a few comments. Or as a comment, having to purchase ebook packages to access a specific book, very similar to the big deal type of journal packages. Yeah, absolutely, where we end up with access to many journals, that you wouldn't normally purchase. So I think that's it. And those sort of stories came up quite a few times, this idea that just we want one thing and we're forced to purchase so much. Just before Chris comes on, just seeing, in the light of the barriers to digital information of the COVID period, is there likely to be a national strategy for funding public access to ebooks and e-journals? I mean, goodness knows. Is there likely to be a national strategy for funding? I mean, likely, probably no. But one of the reasons why we wanted to look at this information was basically what is the what's the appropriate course of action at this point? What is the problem? And what would be reasonable solutions? And I think that what we've highlighted here is there are copyright problems, and some of those might be addressed through things like Plan S in certain areas, of course. Right to attention, hugely important. There are other problems, for example, right to the pricing, which are not copyright problems, they're market things and they're market issues. And so there's a lot of factors involved here. There's also other technical challenges and formatting challenges and so on. So I guess it feels like we're kind of early in this, in some ways. It's upon us, but equally, our limited understanding of actually what would solve, if you like, what the challenges were that have been faced through this pandemic in this area is maybe only just developing. And I think it's quite important to focus on those. Did Chris want to come on?
Yes, thanks, Fred. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent.
Yes.
And thanks very much for that presentation. I think that's really interesting, and I think it's excellent work. The first question I have, presumably those early questions where you have certain around about the mid-70s percentage of people who are looking for material. I'm guessing that matches with the people who say that they are librarians, because that's what librarians do. So I'm assuming that kind of matches up.
Yeah, exactly. It does. Yeah, exactly. We did ask in the questions, were you looking for somebody else or were you looking for yourself? So some people were, for example, you had one PhD researcher, so that they were also looking for information.
Excellent. No, that's useful. I think it'll be interesting to see how you end up reporting that, because a concern that I had, if you're thinking about advocacy, is whether people might say, well, if they can't find the stuff, is that because they're not looking for it properly? And I think it needs to be very clearly said that absolutely that's not the case, that librarians, information professionals, that's what they do. They find information, and if there are barriers, it's because of these legal and financial economic issues. But I'm putting a link into the research that Jane Secker and I did with Lizzie Gadd last year on the CLA license, and that very much, so it chimes in exactly with what you found from this and from the discussions we're having about licensing models not being fit for purpose, cost, and all those practices around the big packages. So I think we would we get data from CLA. This is, I say we, which is the Universities UK Guild HE Copyright Negotiation and Advisory Committee, and then we did this research in conjunction with SCURL and GIST Collections and RL UK. So I think we're very keen. We are looking at this again, and I think it would be very good to meet, join up with that. And obviously Jane is on LACA and is very keen on continuing to be part of looking at the data and making sense of it. But the reference to the ebook strategy, national ebook strategy, just to say this is GIST Collections are doing work on this. So GIST Collections, with their responsibility for looking at how the sector as a whole purchases material. So I think they will be very interested to be involved in getting this data. And I think then it's just a question of picking apart which parts of it are looking at publisher practices, which points are about copyright reform and e-lending and those other issues, because there are differences, aren't there, between those issues.
I think that last point is kind of fundamental there, Chris, and kind of what I was saying in less good words just before I passed over to you, that the issue stems from a lot of different places here. And it isn't, as you say, just about copyright reform. And I think that's one of the challenges. We started the conversation in March when we were saying, there will be problems here, foreseeing, well, we better advocate for copyright reform. So, actually, let's the copyright law is not necessarily the be-all and end-all issue here, or even the way it's implemented. As you say, there are a range of factors that cause some of these challenges.
Yeah.
And I think the other. Oh, sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say, yes, the actual funding of textbooks themselves and the way in which academic institutions work and their own internal policies, which at the moment involve writing books and signing away copyrights to commercial organizations, and open textbooks being an obvious way to resolve, or an open monographs and open access publishing more generally, being, I think that's important parts.
And that's exactly right. That so in some ways you've just got it's about practice and the way that the system is set up, and nothing to do with copyright law or copyright logic. And I guess So I think that's why it's really important to look at all the different factors and not maybe rush into things. The last thing I wanted to say, just on your very first point, is about the way the data is used and for advocacy and making sure it's not misconstrued. That the people looking for this information just didn't know what they were doing. And so I think that's a really valuable point. One of the reasons why we've been a little bit slow to get some of this data out, and why I think it's really valuable that we had these long answer responses, because what that data does is it highlights what people were doing. So the immediate responses, the tables I showed you, says, oh, they didn't find information. And then the responses all tell you this is, they illustrate the process they went through, and they were finding the information. That wasn't the thing. The information, and it tells us the information, they were locating it, but it was in the wrong format, or it wasn't licensed for them, or it was too expensive. And so we have that nice clean story. And I think that's why it's useful to do these surveys in that sort of comprehensive way. And exactly as you've said earlier, with yours as well, to get and I think it is useful to have these surveys and research that mirror each other and complement each other, to underscore that this is not an isolated thing, or people just not knowing how to do their work. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Hi, Fred. There's a comment there in the chat from Erica, and she's asking, do you want any positive examples or to highlight how some publishers actually did everything they could to assist?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that it's fair play. We didn't ask for that. We did ask for problems. So that's fair enough. We didn't seek that in the survey. But yes, I think we absolutely do. And if you have any or know of any, I'd love to hear them, love to receive them. They count for a lot, partly because they show what can be done. And I think that, what's really important is not just saying, here's a load of problems. Okay, find a solution. We want to be saying, here are the problems, here's why we think there are the problems, and here are some of the things that could be done about the problems. So absolutely, the examples from publishers, we know some of them, the examples, certainly in a higher sense, whether it's the changes with the CLA license in that sense, or just some of the open access that was given temporarily to materials. But any further specific examples I would love to receive, definitely. Okay.
Okay, if anyone else wants to come on the mic and ask questions, comment in the chat, feel free to do that now. And if not, we'll move on.
Chris has asked just one further question, just about, he's highlighting the academic book investigation. So this is the open letter that's gone out and it's got some excellent media coverage, just in what LACA's involvement would be. So LACA as an organization hasn't signed the letter or subscribed to it. I think quite a lot of our, I guess we're a member organization, so I think a fair few of our member organizations have. I know, for example, CILIP has. So it's a lot of that crossover. Frankly, I see it as a complementary route. That activity is really important in highlighting. Oh my goodness, it got onto the front page of the BBC, somewhere really high up on the BBC, and a huge number. The number of signatories again amplifies the issue. And I guess what we're trying to do is a little bit on the side, and just a very different approach, really. Of again, I said, getting the data. And I'd really like us to start with conversations directly with publishers about what maybe the challenges and the solutions might be.
Thanks. Thank you. Great. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Fred, for joining us this morning. That was really interesting and provoked some good discussions. Our next speaker is Theo Andrew. Theo leads the scholarly communications team at the University of Edinburgh, with responsibility for policy and strategy and development. His interests include enhancing scholarly communication, using new technologies, and promoting the open agenda within academia. Theo is here to tell us about the open access policy at University of Edinburgh. So Theo, I'll hand over to you if you want to share your screen so that we can see your slides. Thank you.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. So my talk is going to kind of dovetails really nicely with the first one from David Sweeny. So David really was talking about the kind of funder's perspective, and I'm going to be talking about how we are putting into place some of those principles that the research funders are requiring. So let me start. There we go. So hopefully you can see my slides okay there. So I've changed the title a little bit. So my talk is called Enabling Open Access Through Institutional Rights Retention, a Case Study. And when I was kind of looking for images to kind of brighten up my talk, I came across this this image by Banksy, and I thought I really like the analogy of copyright as a football. It's passed around by lots of different players. It enables goals to be scored. It's really exciting at times. And also, I think what I'm going to say, the ideas we're going to talk about, we're going to break a few windows, I think, as well, with what we're proposing with rights retention. We're taking some of the power back. So my talk really continues the story that David started with, talking about Plan S. But I'm going to continue this story. I'm going to explain how rights retention can help institutions not only comply with the research funders' grant conditions, but also how it can save us money as institutions. It can reduce our financial burden. It can help with streamlining repository processes through less copyright checks. But before we go there, we first really need to set the scene and explain kind of where we currently are with current researchers' publishing habits. Talk a little bit about managing change in difficult situations, kind of unpicking the current copyright situation with academic publishing, and then kind of offering this rights retention as a potential solution and looking forwards to 2021. So I'm not really going to talk too much about research funders' policies. You know, David has been talking about some of the developments. I just really want to show and kind of highlight the situation. It is a developing situation. It is complicated. Plan S was supposed to come in and align a lot of the research funders to have one similar policy. Instead, what we're seeing is that it has fragmented many research funders' positions. So previously we had the Charity Open Access Fund, which was a collaboration of different medical charities, including the Wellcome Trust, Cancer Research UK, British Heart Foundation, and others. Due to Plan S, the Charity Open Access Fund has split, with the Wellcome Trust implementing its own policy from 1st of January 2021. Cancer Research UK has set up their own policy. It's similar to the Wellcome Trust, however, that's going to be starting a year later. And BHF also has a policy that's different. They don't require immediate open access straight away, and they do allow hybrid open access. So I'm not really going to go into like the specifics of these policies. I just want to kind of highlight that research funders have their own kind of points of view, and at the minute they're fragmenting. So previously we looked after one or two open access block grants. We had the Wellcome Trust and UKRI. This is now split into 4 because of Plan S. We have double the amount of complexity that we had. On top of these organisations with open access policies, we also have the REF, so there are open access requirements for researchers there. And there's also other notable actors like the Chief Scientist's Office here in Scotland, and also the EU Horizon 2020. So the take-home message from this is it's really difficult for researchers to know what they need to do. It depends on who they're funded, where they're publishing. Ideally, we just have one process for them to follow, and rights retention allows you to do this. So let's have a look at current researcher publishing habits. One of the dangers of kind of screen sharing is I'm not sure how legible this slide is to people. You might be looking on a small laptop, so apologies if you are. I've got a second screen where I can clearly see some of these figures, but if you can't see them, the slides will be circulated so you can have a look, so don't worry about that. But this, I'm showing a table of our REF open access compliance status at the University of Edinburgh. I'm just going to talk you through some of this. And really what this table is showing is researcher publishing habits for gold open access. And I'm kind of assuming that everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say gold open access. Really, gold open access to me is just do it yourself. Do it yourself open access. You can put a copy of the author's accepted manuscript into a repository and make it open access. That way you're not relying on anyone else to do anything. You're not relying on publishers. You're not relying on paying someone to do this. So Green OA is do it yourself. And the REF open access policy, for those of you not familiar, requires researchers to deposit copies, the author's accepted manuscript, copies of the paper within 3 months of the date of acceptance. And then it has to be made open access within 12 months. Now, there's a variety of different publishers' embargo lengths. I'm not going to talk too much about them, but they can vary from immediate open access as a 0 embargo through to 2 years or even longer. However, to be REF compliant, open access has to be within 12 months. So we've been we've been handling this policy for a while now. Scotland and the UK, we're all kind of dealing with this, and Scotland is doing exceedingly well. All of the institutions within Scotland who are covered by the REF open access policy, they're doing extremely well. Speaking with colleagues, everyone's around about 90% compliant. So I'm not kind of taking credit here saying Edinburgh's doing amazingly. I think all Scottish institutions are doing really well here, and certainly across the UK as well. Everyone's really enabling green open access. But at Edinburgh, during the period 1st of April, when the open access requirements first come in, through to our last data point, which is end of July, and we're kind of running 3 to 4 months behind the present date because of the deposited within the 3 months of date of acceptance. But looking at the latest data point I can share with you, and I'm just going to get a little laser pointer out here, and I can highlight. Here we go. So this column here is showing the overall totals for the University of Edinburgh. And within this period, we've had 29,000 journal articles and conference proceedings published, of which 91% have been deposited within 3 months of the date of acceptance and made open access within 12 months. So we're doing really well there. Around about 5% of these figures are uncompliant. They just haven't been made open access in time. And we have a small sort of number that are pending. They're indeterminate. We don't have enough data to assess whether they are compliant or not, or there may be exceptions there. So I suspect this kind of figure is very typical of institutions within the UK. And that is to say that the majority of UK academics are doing green open access now because the REF requires them to do so. And they're doing it at scale. We're seeing 90% compliance here. Now, researchers are putting the content into repositories, and they are making them open access, but after this embargo period. So they are not going to be compliant with Plan S funders like UKRI. So that's what's happening now with green open access. So what about gold open access? So gold open access, I tend to think of as the publishers do it. It's not do it yourself. We are asking publishers to make the journal articles open access immediately upon publication. Most often there's a fee associated with this, an article processing charge. We're not always, but the majority of journals that academics or our academics seem to publish in require an article processing charge. So I've just got a little tree map here just showing you some kind of highlights of the University of Edinburgh's gold open access expenditure in 2019. Now, the first kind of point I want to show you is that of our entire budget that we've spent, round about a third is taken up by one single publisher, Elsevier. Half of our budget is taken up with the top three publishers, Elsevier, Springer Nature, and Wiley. They are dominating the gold open access kind of business models. Particularly if you also consider that Biomed Central are also part of Springer Nature. So if you kind of add this blob on here, we'll see that, you know, gold open access, paid gold open access really is dominated by commercial interests. And David Sweeny, he kind of hinted that research funders are not happy with the way that the business models have developed. Kind of just thinking back to what he said, you know, he wanted to kind of change this. So this really kind of shows kind of on the ground kind of figures of how UKRI and charitable organisations' money is being spent. So kind of looking in summary at the University of Edinburgh, in 2019 we spent £1.3 million on open access charges, and this paid for 623 article processing charges, 623 articles. Now, if you ask me, spending £1.3 million on 600 articles to make them open access isn't particularly good value for money. That's my own personal point of view. It might not coincide with my employer's point of view, but my personal point of view is that this is far too expensive. There's the money we get from charitable organisations like Cancer Research paying for article processing charges in the region of $5,000 US. I think that's outrageous. So I'm really kind of on board with some of the Planis funders trying to redress this balance. So of that £1.3 million that we spent last year, the majority of that was on hybrid open access. We spent 730,000 on 316 articles. Hybrid open access is where commercial publishers charge subscriptions to access the content, and then you can also pay for individual open access to articles. And David kind of referred to that as double dipping. This is quite kind of a concept that publishers don't like because they say that it's not double dipping, and we kind of say it is. It's contentious. But what we do see is that hybrid open access is 25% more expensive than fully gold open access. And there may be legitimate reasons for that. You know, publishers have to kind of change their publishing platforms and processes to kind of do, but I still think that hybrid open access is more expensive and not particularly the right way to go. So the take-home message is that gold open access is too expensive. It really is. At the University of Edinburgh last year, we published 9,500 research outputs, of which around about 6,000 were journal articles or conference proceedings. If we wanted to make just those 6,000 journal articles open access via paid gold open access, it will cost us £12 million. Now, you know, you don't have to be a genius to see that the current library materials budget cannot cover this in the slightest. Also alongside journal subscriptions as well, and also monographs and other content that libraries source for our readers. So it's simply impossible for institutions to fully go over to gold open access for all of their content. But what about if we just consider UKRI papers? So UKRI say that we have to make our journal articles open, and they provide a block grant for us to do this. They give us a block grant of £1 million in 2019-20 to pay for gold open access. However, if we wanted to publish all of our UKRI papers, and we kind of identified there's 1,200 of them, it would cost us £2.5 million to publish them all as gold open access. The block grant just simply doesn't cover this. Similarly, if you look at the Wellcome Trust, who have a similar policy, they give us a generous block grant of nearly £500,000, but that still doesn't cover all of the costs that we require. So despite these generous block grants, there's a significant funding shortfall. Or if you flip that on its head, you could say that gold open access is just far too expensive. So what we can clearly see is that gold open access, there's not enough money in the system to satisfy publishers' demands. So green open access will have to play a part in meeting funders' expectations for immediate gold open access. Now, there's a number of barriers to green open access, I'm afraid. Over the years, we've overcome some of them. So these are the barriers that I see. Then there's probably a few more in there. But the initial hurdle that we had to clear was that the academic's preference was for the version of record. We had great resistance to people supplying accepted manuscripts. You know, these are the Word documents or other formats that were supplied to the publishers before they were published. And word for word, they are exactly the same as the published version, but they just don't have the publisher's typesetting or the logos. And many academics, you know, their preference was that people wanted to read the publisher's PDF. But we have found that accepted manuscripts are good enough. You know, you can do text data mining with them. You can, the content is exactly the same. You can still read this. And with the REF open access policy, we're now seeing that 90% of academics are giving us their content. So accepted manuscripts are good enough. We've overcome that barrier. We had initial problems with sourcing and depositing correct versions of manuscripts, but like I said, we've overcome that hurdle now. We've mostly solved that problem. Our own REF compliance is at 91%, and I'm sure many of my colleagues in other institutions will have higher open access compliance, because we've put a lot of hard work into setting up processes to capture accepted manuscripts off our academic colleagues. The main barrier for green open access now are publishers' journal embargo periods. Many publishers require, and in fact the majority of publishers require, a journal embargo period. I'm not going to talk too much about this, about the embargo lengths, but most of them are around about the 12-month period. And the journal publishers say, we need a journal embargo because we have to safeguard our revenue stream. If this content is out there for free, then people will not buy our journals. The logic is fairly clear to see there. However, I'm going to suggest that this is completely a red herring. It is false. Some disciplines already have immediate open access, and they've had it for decades. So if we look at physics, for example, they have had the preprint server archive since the early 90s. So for nearly 2 decades, they've had immediate open access to all of their journal content. People will say, well, that's just preprints, it's not the final version. Well, physicists quite often update and replace the preprint with the final version. So if you did an analysis, you would see that I would suspect that the final version content is held in archive in significant volumes. So physicists have immediate open access for all intents and purposes, and have had it for around about 20 years. And we have never seen significant journal cancellations, even though the content is out there for free. We're also seeing some publishers already have, and they allow immediate open access straight away. So, think about Royal Society, Cambridge University Press for certain journals in arts and humanities and social sciences. They allow immediate open access. Emerald is another publisher. So if they can survive with 0 embargoes and they're fine, people are not cancelling the journals, then I don't understand how other journals are saying this is such a massive problem. So how are we going to overcome this, the barriers, the final barrier that we're seeing for immediate green open access? So this kind of GIF here sums up how I feel many researchers, academics are. They're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. So on the one hand, they have their funders saying you have to do immediate open access now. This is something you have to do. The publishers are saying you're not allowed to do immediate open access unless you pay us significant fees. If that funding is not available, then the authors are not going to be able to do green open access. So they're really kind of stuck. But the academics, they're going to publish where they want to anyway, rather than changing their kind of publishing habits. They are going to publish where they want in the journals they require. So we're kind of seeing that academics are being obstinate. They're publishing in the same journals they always have. We're seeing research funders are starting to be annoyed with paying too much fees. So they're saying we want immediate open access now. And we're seeing journal publishers are saying we're not changing our policies. So we've kind of got 3 kind of pig-headed people all at loggerheads at the minute, and we've got libraries in the middle stuck trying to sort this out. So what are we doing? So this is the main part of the talk that I really wanted to kind of give to you today. It's about our kind of strategy, our kind of roadmap for what we're doing to comply with research funders' policies. And we've got kind of 4 strings, 4 elements that we are going to kind of pursue. So for funded research, so for example, Wellcome Trust or UKRI, our authors will be able to do gold open access funded through the generous block grants that the funders give us. So we're going to be completely reserving the gold open access block grants for these journals that are fully open access, and we are not going to be paying hybrid open access, and we've been cutting down on the amount of hybrid access that we've been paying for over the last year or so. We're not completely anti-publishers. I might come across that way. However, we are working closely with societies and publishers to kind of help them transition. So we are signing up to transformative agreements, TAs, as some people like to call them. We're signing up to these read and publish deals. We currently have 10 read and publish deals in place at the minute. We've got some large ones with like Wiley and Springer. So we're working with the large commercial publishers, but we're also dealing with the kind of small societies who have a lot of fears and worries, and we want to bring them along with us. So we have a number of small kind of journals hosted by societies, and as they come up with read and publish deals through GIST collections, we're signing up to them and supporting them in that way. Our third element is really important, and this is something that I'm really excited about, that we're building our own supporting infrastructure. So we have our own open access journal platform at Edinburgh with 20 odd journals at the minute, and I'd encourage you to take a look. That's at journals.ed.ac.uk. And this really is, our library is providing a platform for academics at Edinburgh to take control of their own journals and make them open access on our platform. We're also experimenting with different journal types. So we have got a data journal with the which is closely aligned to the British Guide to Pharmacology, and it's a journal that's set up to allow citations to databases. So it's kind of we're kind of investigating new kind of forms of publishing in conjunction with our academic colleagues, and all of these things are not really commercially viable. Publishers couldn't make money out of these journals, so they're not being published formally. These are kind of journals that academics will be setting up on their own using a WordPress site or worse, or struggling by themselves, and the library is able to come in and support them to do this in a professional standard. So this is, I'm really excited about this. We're also investigating what we can do in the area of open monographs, and we'll be setting up a new platform in 2021. So, and I'm sure we'll be giving talks about this in the future. The fourth element that we're looking at is updating our research publications policy. And this is really kind of the main part. I'm just talking about how the university is going about rights retention. And this will really help simplify our policy stack. So before we kind of start with that though, before we kind of start with changing our kind of relationship with intellectual property at the university, we really need to kind of build some solid foundations. There is current ambiguity around copyright ownership of journal articles, of scholarly articles, of research outputs that are published. Who owns the copyright to journal articles? Is it the employer or is it the employee? The copyright law is quite clear that the employer owns copyright to works created during employment. So, technically it should be the University of Edinburgh, but however, we have traditionally outsourced this to our employees, to authors, to sign away copyright on behalf of the university. There's plus and minuses to this. I kind of mentioned that we publish 9,500 research outputs a year. If the university had to kind of negotiate and deal with publishers, that's a significant amount of work. So we've kind of traditionally pushed that back to authors to sort out by themselves, and authors have signed away copyright in many cases. So it's kind of, on the one hand, it's simplified things, but on the other hand, it has created these problems around copyright and the transfer of that copyright ownership to publishers. But nowhere is this acknowledged or actually written down. It's really there's a lot of ambiguity there. So we sought to confirm the current practice that members of staff own the copyright to their scholarly works. And this will allow the kind of streamlined publishing process to continue. And it also kind of allays the fears of a power grab. You know, the university is not coming in saying, we own your research outputs. We're saying, well, you know, you've written these, and for many years you have treated them as your own work, and you've signed away copyright. We're not going to come in and take this off you. So we're confirming that the current practice as it stands, academics own the copyright to your scholarly works. We're not talking about courseworks or other forms, but literally just research outputs. Now, in return for kind of streamlining this and kind of really kind of making it clear, we're saying that we're going to be updating the kind of terms and conditions of employment for staff at the university. So we're saying that each staff member with a responsibility for research, they will grant the University of Edinburgh a non-exclusive, irrevocable worldwide license to make manuscripts immediately available under a Creative Commons attribution license. And this is completely in line with Plan S funders. So this is what the Wellcome Trust are going to be doing. They have updated their grant conditions from next year. We just heard from David Sweeny that this is likely to be happening from 1st of January 22. So, you know, this is the direction of travel. Now, for these funded researchers, you know, Wellcome Trust UKRI, they'll be able to do immediate open access on piggybacking on their grant terms and conditions. What we're doing is just saying, well, everyone at our institution has a similar rights retention. The university is retaining a right to do immediate open access with Creative Commons licenses. Now, this is only going to apply to journal articles, including conference proceedings. It's not applying to other research outputs like monographs, book chapters, etc. And that's because, you know, the business model is evolving. It's different to journal articles. So while our policy will apply to only journal articles and conference proceedings, we are strongly encouraging authors to try and have enter into a negotiation with their publishers to see if they can make their works immediately open. So the policy only applies to articles submitted after the adoption. So anything done prior to that, they are currently exempt. We have had to have an opt-out of the policy at the request of the unions. So part of the processes of getting a new policy at the universities, we have to have a wide consultation. And the unions have kind of said, well, you know, one size doesn't fit all. You know, some people might need to opt out. And so we've had to include an opt-out policy. But likewise, we thought, well, if we've got an opt-out, we can also have an opt-in policy. So the policy really was primarily aimed at those members of staff with a responsibility for research, but there's also a lot of teaching staff on teaching-only contracts. They might want to, they also do research, they might want to make it available. So we're offering it to opt-in there. Also, postgraduate students as well. They may wish to opt into the policy, so we're kind of enabling them to be part of the policy whilst not requiring them to. So this kind of step, I'm coming towards the end of my talk today, and this just kind of shows you some of the steps that it's taken us to work towards implementation. We're not quite there yet. We've had a number of setbacks on the way. So back in March, we were kind of ready to go to get sign off through our research policy group. However, we've had a number of hurdles put into our way. For example, the UCU strikes. We have had, you know, a global pandemic. So things that tend to be put on the back burner a little bit. But we started the process by working with our university legal services, the lawyers. We sat down and we talked with them, we explained what we wanted to do, and they helped us kind of develop the policy. We then took this draft to College Deans of Research and had kind of an informal chat with them. Once we'd kind of come up with a policy that's agreeable with them, we took it to college research committees and shared it wider with senior academics with a responsibility for research. We then took it to a vice principal for research and planning, who gave us kind of a green light to take it to the university senior leadership team. So, in theory, the principal has kind of seen this and kind of given us a green light to go ahead. Because we're changing policy, we had to make sure that the unions were involved. So we've spoken to our local UCU branch at Edinburgh and also the wider UCU Scotland, and they have come back with some good feedback. So the opt-out policy is in there. And we're taking it through the HR policy development group. And we're currently just getting sign-off on that before we take it for a final sign-off. And then once that happens, our legal services have to notify publishers. So we've heard that Plan S have already done this, and they're already taking some of the flack for that. So we're very grateful for them to do that. And we're just going to be kind of piggybacking on their tailcoats. So we'll be sending notifications to publishers. We initially wanted a soft launch in January 21. And a hard launch kind of later on in the year. However, we're still waiting for the sign-off from the university executive. So that's kind of where we are at the minute. So we're hopeful that next year we'll be able to launch some of our policies. So I'm just kind of bringing to the end of my talk. So thank you for listening. I'm going to end my slideshow now, and hopefully I'm still screen sharing, so stop the share. There we go. I do have some kind of questions, and the kind of questions was, are any other institutions planning similar policy developments? The UK Scholarly Communication Licence. The other question I wanted to ask was, is gold open access financially viable at your institution, or is it just a problem for large, intensive universities like ourselves? And does anyone have any evidence that zero-month embargoes are harmful to journal subscriptions? I'm not seeing it, but I might not be looking in the right place. So it would really be interesting to kind of hear from others. So I'm just going to start looking at some of the questions in the chat. Okay, Valley was just saying, I like the take on gold and green definitions because there's so many variations. Yeah, I get really confused. I've been doing open access for a long time, and platinum, gold, platinum OA, bronze OA. I get really confused by it still, and I think I know what I'm talking about. So how my own researchers at my own institutions understand, I don't. So I kind of really tried to make it clear: do it yourself, or the publishers do it, and we can work the rest out from there. Ruth asks about immediately subverting an embargo period made explicit in the policy. The policy is quite wordy, so I've not kind of gone through it a lot, but it does kind of make it immediate that it is the university is retaining rights to do this. So I think Chris has just said how much engagements we've had with the wider academic community. So yeah, that's a really good question, because we want to bring people along with us rather than forcing the issue. So we have, the approach we have taken is that we've been going through college research committees, and these are kind of boards where senior academics and deans of research from the 3 colleges sit and kind of discuss research in their local area, and then they can cascade that down to their own schools. So we've had engagement at the kind of the top level, and what we're really missing is kind of engagement at the bottom level with early career researchers. And so we're now beginning on this process of doing kind of town hall meetings where we're not just talking about our rights retention policy, we're also talking about Plan S. So we're kind of doing online meetings based within research centres and trying to go to where people are currently. So, it's really difficult reaching out and finding people, but we're beginning that process now.
Thanks, that's interesting. I just reflecting on what's happening at Kent, and we're not at that stage where we've actually been able to address really the policy issues, but we struggle all the time to get, and we know that when all of these policy things come into effect and when the rights retention strategy is there, whenever that kicks in for UKRI or other meaningful funders, that the publishers and the authors are going to feel stuck in the middle still, I think, even with these, what I think are very good policy developments. And it's just finding a way to explain what can seem like a very niche topic or a very complex area, even though I think this, what you've done is absolutely excellent. That I think, are you the first institution to have actually put a UKSCL type arrangement in place that you know of?
I think so. You've noticed that I've not really called it the UKSCL because we found publishers had done a lot of subversive kind of infiltration and spreading fear, uncertainty within our academics. So they'll contact journal editors saying the UKSCL is going to bring the sky down and force the journals to close. So we've not called it the UKSCL because the publishers have tried to tar it. We've just kind of said this is our research publications policy. But it is, in for all intents and purposes, it is exactly the same as the scholarly communications license.
Although, just to clarify, it is CC BY 0-month embargo. Mm-hmm. So it's in line with the Plan S principles.
Yes.
Rather than what UKSCL was, that was more in line with a less kind of open version. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's an evolving process where we started off with one thing and we developed a model license, and then that's changed, and it's hard for things are kind of snowballing, and it's hard for people to keep up. So we're just trying to kind of surf the wave that we're seeing research policy funders are kind of really developing, and we're just trying to stay in line with that to enable our researchers to comply. I've got a question from Mike asking about research data and any plans to include that in the policy. So we have our own research data policy, and that is going to be updated, and it's currently devolved from our research publications policy, and there's good reasons for that. We know we're just trying to take one step at a time, address one problem, and kind of get that done, and then move to the next, and then the next. I think if we try to address everything as one big problem, we'll just have inertia and we'll never get anywhere. So we're teasing the waters with the research publications first, and then research data will kind of be evolving there. Sally McIntosh says, have we had any response from large publishers around acceptance of this change? We've not told them yet. So our lawyers are kind of have written a draft, and we'll be sending these out kind of in the new year. So we're just really waiting kind of to do this right at the last moment to kind of send this off. That's the approach our lawyers want to take on that. Michelle has a good question about OA for monographs, and would we look to extending it to cover books and chapters? So similar to Mike's kind of the response I gave to Mike, we're looking at just doing individual hurdles and barriers. So we're kind of doing journal articles first, and then we might kind of extend to look at other research outputs. But if we try to do everything all at the same time, I think our academics would just take one look at us and just panic. They'll be like, oh, too much, no, this is not going to happen. So we're trying to introduce change slowly. We're trying to bring people along with us and offer this as a solution, rather than saying we're kind of, you have to do this, this is policy, it's a new thing, you've got to do it. We're saying, oh, your research funders are making you do this. Here is a tool, something that you can use to help do this. And you can opt out if you really don't like it. But we really consider, you should try and come with us on this. So we're trying to show it as a solution, not as something really difficult. Excellent. I feel like I've been talking for ages. So I'd like to kind of hand over to our next speakers.
Theo, I just had one other question.
Sure.
You mentioned your journals.ed platform.
Yeah.
And that's clearly for research output of your own from your own institution, have you considered or spoken to other institutions about creating some form of open access platform collaboratively that might provide a solution for other Scottish or UK institutions?
It's interesting you say that. I didn't want to kind of do like an advertising pitch, but we are part of a SCURL shared services. So we do offer a journal hosting as part of SCURL under their shared services. So it's not like an Edinburgh thing. You know, we're not kind of just saying, you know, we are a publisher and we will provide a journal. It's a SCURL shared service where we will provide an OJS open access platform for very reasonable rates. I think they're around about £1,100 per year. And we do have a number of SCURL partners who are doing this. So Robert Gordon University have a journal with us. We also have Heriot Watt, I believe, who publish with us. Also, we have external partners like the Scottish Societies of Antiquaries. I can never say that word. They are publishing with us. Also, we are working with the Royal Botanic Gardens Edinburgh for their journals, so Saboldia, and they're bringing a journal to us. Hopefully I can say this, from Cambridge University Press. The Edinburgh Journal of Botany is going to come and be hosted. But for these hosted services, it's not about Edinburgh, it's all about kind of SCURL. We just sit in the background and enable people to do this. So if anyone's interested, you know, please feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, there's actually someone that asked a question there that is 1,100 per year. Is that for a set number of publications?
Yeah, so please don't quote me exactly on that figure. It may, but it's that kind of right ballpark. But that is literally just for the platform, and then you can have multiple journals on that platform, and you know, we're not looking at article levels or publications. It's just, you know, that's a flat fee. It's a shared service, so we can legally only charge what it costs us. We're not making any money on top of that. You know, there's strict procurement guidelines to what a shared service can be, and we fit directly in that. So that's why the costs are so low. So for example, we charge that figure, and you can have, you know, multiple journals on that platform. Sorry for the sales pitch there. I don't like.
No problem. Thank you. I did ask a question. Thank you. Thank you very much for that talk. That generated some really interesting discussion. I see Jane has now joined us, so I'll move on to our final speakers. So Chris Morrison is Copyright Licensing and Policy Manager at the University of Kent, and Jane Stecker is Senior Lecturer in Educational Development at City University of London. Chris and Jane are on a mission to make learning about copyright fun, engaging, and empowering. So together they run the copyrightliteracy.org site, where a lot of their copyright teaching and learning resources are openly accessible. And since March, when it was clear that university libraries were starting to close their physical premises, they have been running weekly and now fortnightly webinars for the copyright community called Copyright in a Time of Crisis. So I, I'm sure quite a lot of you on today's call will have participated in those and listened to those webinars. So Jane and Chris are here to talk to us today about the work they have done on publisher and licensing policies, which they undertook for SPARC Europe. I'll turn off my mic now and I'll hand over to Jane and Chris. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks,
Hi there.
everybody. Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Thanks for the introduction. We're actually going to talk about not copyright in a time of crisis, but a report that we were involved in, a piece of consultancy recently. So without further ado, let's crack on, shall we, Chris? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, just to clarify, this is Jane and I talking about something which is, it's a co-authored report with Vanessa Proudman, who's the Chief Executive of SPARC Europe, and also Ignacy Labastida, who's at the University of Barcelona, a member of the SPARC Europe forward. So let's see if I can actually advance the slides and see if it's working. So this is the report. This is the place that you can share it. So Jane, you're going to be doing links, aren't you? So if you can stick the link to the report in the chat, we'll share all the slides afterwards. They're all Creative Commons licensed. You can go and have a look at it, and you could be the 2,701st downloader of it.
Yeah, just bear with me because I'm multitasking here. So
Well, you can do it. I know you can do it.
Yeah. I'll get that link in there in a moment. So
Excellent.
yeah.
So once you've done that, you're going to tell us about the overview of what we're talking about today.
Okay, so yeah, what we're going to cover today in a fairly rapid presentation, so that's the link to the report if you haven't seen it, is a bit about the aims of the study, how we did the work, and obviously the findings fairly briefly. It's a quite a long report, so we're going to pick up some of the recommendations, and I suspect we won't have a lot of time for discussion, but we're very happy if you want to get in touch with us afterwards. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's the running order of the event now.
Running order. So we've heard a lot about Coalition S, Plan S. We've heard from David Sweeny this morning. We've heard Theo talking about how this is being addressed, the issues in Edinburgh in one institution. So this is to say, this is kind of a key change, obviously, in the open access space. And this is not the only reason that Spark Europe wanted to do this study. So if we look at the aims of what Spark Europe wanted to find out is what were the copyright and licensing policies of academic publishers, how they're presented to authors, explore how ready publishers are to meet those Plan S requirements, and provide a series of recommendations. But as I said, it wasn't just about Plan S, it was about the whole of the scholarly communication system, about the way in which publishers presented the rights that they required and the rights that were assigned to the outputs that they created in order to understand that sort of current state of play. So
Deborah's already introduced us, but I guess just to sort of explain a bit about why Chris and I wanted to get involved in this. We have been very interested for a long time, obviously, in copyright education issues, but I think the report particularly interested us because it was quite a bit about how publishers' policies might be impacting on authors, how easy it was to interpret those policies when you're looking at it as a writer. And I think certainly for me, I was very aware that there's quite a lot of misunderstandings amongst academic staff I spoke to about what open access was and how it worked and what rights they might have in their publications. So it was a really good opportunity to go into this in some depth and find out sort of how it looks from the author's perspective by the investigation we did. If I just talk you through the research questions. We were interested particularly in what the policies might limit in terms of authors' ability to share their journal articles openly. So, thinking about whether they was able to go down green open access routes and archive articles on their institutional or in the subject repository. We were also interested in the way that rights were granted or transferred between authors and publishers. So, whether that was done through a transfer of copyright or whether, or sometimes that's called an assignment, and some of that language I think that's used is not always clear. Sometimes that can be done actually through licensing, which is a slightly different way of doing that. But kind of serves the same end. But again, we wanted to sort of look whether copyright was transferred whole scale, whether exclusive licenses were used, or whether there was cases where non-exclusive licenses were used, so authors retained some of the publishing rights. Our final research question, and again another kind of particular interest of ours, is Creative Commons licenses, open licenses. So we wanted to have a look at how Creative Commons licenses were permitted for academic articles, and also just to kind of also investigate whether there was consistency with the sort of stated policies and then information that was communicated to authors. I'll just say briefly a bit about how we actually went about the research, and it was started off, the report, by Brigitte Vizina. She was working at the time for SPARC Europe, and had done a kind of initial piece of the research. Chris and I picked this up, and it's pretty much about the time of the lockdown in around March, April. And we sort of built on that work. We went into more detail looking at 10 legacy European academic publishers. We'll explain who those are in a moment. We reran some of the data reports that we had been presented with. We had a look at what was available from the Directory of Open Access Journals. And then the published report came out a couple of months ago in September 2020, which we were involved in the writing of as well. So Chris, I think you're going to tell us.
Yeah, so the data, where did we get the data from to do this research? So the legacy publishers that Jane mentions are these ones. We looked at number of publications of those that were not pure open access publishers. You recognize all the names. Looking at Theo's earlier slide as to where all the money is going, those big chunks, it's those ones. So we're looking at really what we wanted to look in detail, or SPARC Europe certainly wanted to understand those that use traditional subscription publication models, and to understand what their policies were. We also looked at a subset of the Directory of Open Access Journals. So we extracted a list of all of those journals, and then filtered out those that were from based in European countries. So there were 7,106 of those out of a total of 14,475. So these are journals that are pure open access only. So we were able to look at those ones and understand a bit more about what their policies were. So the data sets that we used are available. We extracted them all, we built on them and created, well, the first one is the DOAJ data set, which is licensed Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike. So our data set is also Share Alike licensed, but the work that we did on the copyright, the legacy copyright policies, is CC0 and all available from that link if you are interested in getting into all the nitty-gritty. And even though there's a lot of detail in there, you might find it interesting, because in the report we quote certain bits of publisher policies, but all our workings out, if you like, are there and reproducible, and including reproductions of all the publisher policy documents themselves.
So just onto the sort of findings, and I'll just start by talking about the 10 legacy publishers, the ones that you just saw listed on the slide. When we were doing our investigation, as Chris mentioned, we've downloaded a lot of the material from their website, and we've kind of got that on record, so we know exactly, you know, that it's based on the information at a point in time, and that may change. But we found it quite confusing in some ways. Firstly, we found information about open access was on multiple web pages, which meant that you know, sometimes as an author that could be a little bit confusing. It could also mean that there's sometimes some contradictory statements. This was particularly useful if you went to a top level sort of publisher site and then you were drilling down into a journal. So it's looking at some of the discrepancies that might occur there. And we also found, and this, you know, obviously our authors don't just publish with one publisher, and there is quite a lot of variation in terminology that's used. So just things like authors accepted manuscript version of record. Sometimes there's some variation in those sorts of terms, which, you know, I think from a publisher, from an author perspective, could lead to some confusion, really. In terms of whether copyright had to be transferred, so this is the kind of the legacy publishers, but it's also when you've not down the gold open access route, so non-open access titles. We actually found that out of the 10 publishers, only one allowed a publisher to retain their copyright. There were 4 publishers where some of their journal titles were, you know, there was some flexibility. Some of those did allow authors to retain copyright, but certainly not all of them across the board. And there were 5 where actually a full transfer of copyright was asked for, and actually in all cases authors were asked to sign an exclusive publishing agreement, even, you know, they did retain the copyright themselves, which in many ways is kind of you know, means it's a technicality that they're retaining copyright because they're not able to republish the work. Now, this is a bit of a quiz question for you. I don't think we've got any poll in here, so you can put your answer in the chat. So what percentage of the 7,106 European open access journals do you think, based on what we said about the legacy titles, so only 1 of them out of the 10 let authors retain copyright and publishing rights, and in fact, in terms of publishing rights, none of them. So what percentage do you think of the open access journals that are in the DOAJ allow it? So do you think it's 20%, 20.5? Do you think it's 39.5? Do you think it's 54.5? Or do you think it is 74.5? Yes, pop your answer in the chat if you've got any ideas. Let's see what people think. We could have done polls here, couldn't we, Chris?
We could have done polls.
We like
we could have said that.
Yeah. Anyone got any ideas?
I think has everyone fallen asleep? Is everyone waiting for their lunch? Greg's gone.
Yeah,
Greg's gone in. Here we go. We got some.
Okay, we're going. People going on the low side. Mary's gone for 54. Anyone think it was 75? Okay. Right, you're all okay.
Should we put them out of their misery?
Yeah, out of misery.
Okay.
So in fact, it was around 40%.
Yeah, so
this is open access, Chris.
So let's look at the full pie chart here. So the author holds copyright and retains publishing right for these open access journals. It's this 39.5, but in the majority, well, over 50%, the author did not hold copyright and did not retain the publishing right. So this is even for pure open access journals. So that was quite an interesting finding. Should we move on to another bit of interactivity? Are we ready?
Yeah.
So we're going back to the legacy publishers, the 10 big publishers who we pay lots of money. How many of them used more than one type of Creative Commons license? So, you know, we have different types of Creative Commons license. You have the CC BY, CC BY SA, CC BY NC, ND. So what we've got, 6, 9, 3, 9.
Oh. This is interesting. We should have done a poll.
We should have done a poll. Can you not immediately look at a list of numbers, Jane, and immediately work out which are the ones that come in? I
can't.
Let's move on. Okay, it was 9. So we've got a lovely multicolored chart now, haven't we? These are the publishers. So the majority of them offer more than one. You see, all of them provide CC BY. I guess the next most popular ones are the BYNC and the NCND there on the right. So green means that is they do offer it, and it means no. None of them go for the BYSA, and only one for the BYNCSA. So I think what we see here is a tendency to go for the CC BY, presumably for a gold route, but then the alternative is to then go to the non-commercial offerings and not look at the others. So is this the final one?
I think this is, yes.
Do you want to explain this one?
Yes. Okay, so just thinking there, so it was none of them that were using the more than one CC license. Just to say that the data that we could compare from DOAJ was a bit different to the data, obviously, when we were looking at the websites. So DOAJ listed the journal, listed the most restrictive CC license that was being used. So how many people, what percentage do you think of all the open access journals were actually going for the CCBY. So how many were actually kind of, that was their sort of default? Any ideas? Do you think it was 16%, 27, 45, 55? Greg thinks it's 55. Oh, we've got lots popular. 55 is coming out popular. Okay. All right. Show them the answer, Chris.
I would say well done to Mary, the first person to get the correct answer. It was 45.5%. So here is the pie chart breakdown, which hopefully people can see. So it's that 45.5 is the CCBY, but CCBY NCND, again, the next most popular, as with the last one, is the most restrictive of the licenses. So,
okay,
shall we look at some Plan S synergies? So comparing these publisher positions with what Plan S policy says, we note that 87.2% of the titles published by these 10 legacy publishers are either hybrid or subscription, so are not pure open access. We didn't ask about, this didn't involve an analysis of transformative arrangements, this research. It was looking at the policies that were available, policy information on the website, and we did ask the publishers to clarify that, but we don't have the transformative arrangements. But still, we can see a large number still using the hybrid with all its issues of double dipping and subscriptions, which are not accepted. 9 out of 10 legacy publishers have embargoes on green open access. So the embargo issue that Theo was talking about earlier, where the rights retention and David, of course, as well. But 9 out of 10 have that. Only 1 out of 10 publishers allow authors to retain copyright. And as Jane mentioned earlier on, these authors must sign an exclusive licensing agreement. When we look at the DOAJ data, we see that more than 50%, 59.4% are not Plan S compliant, either because they ask for a copyright transfer, or because they use a non-supported type of Creative Commons license, or both of those. So we see that there's some work to be done here at the pure open access journal level as well.
Okay, so if we go on to the recommendations, now what we drafted in the report are a series of recommendations for different stakeholders here. In the interest of time, obviously, we were going to focus a bit more on the recommendations for research institutions, libraries, and for academic authors. But I guess across the board, the kind of key recommendation was really that these stakeholders need to work together better to adopt a standardized language, because I think it is adding to the confusion and the already complexities that there are around open access.
Yeah, absolutely. So we ask providers to provide more succinct information, machine readable and up-to-date policy data to support compliance workflows, replace exclusive license agreements to publish, to enable authors to further publishing rights, and use existing license frameworks such as Creative Commons rather than new licensing schemes. So that was an interesting thing. We did point out that there were institutions, I mean, for example, Elsevier had their own open license, which when you actually look at it is not the same as the Creative Commons license, and doesn't really support open access in the way that it's defined in its various definitions. Interesting to see how much the publishers take on these recommendations. We've seen an initial response to this report where they're saying, well, they already do a lot for open access, as you might expect them to say. Funders communicate and discuss policy regarding rights retention and open licensing with all stakeholders. I mean, I think it's fair to say funders, certainly the Coalition S funders, are doing that. But it's a call from Spark Europe certainly to say this is really, funders have a really important role to play in aligning policies and communicating them. And then this quite large bullet point here is really referring to the rights retention arrangements as per Coalition S's work under Plan S. Jane, do you want to talk through the library
Yeah,
and research
recommendations
institution?
for library, which I guess will be particularly of interest to those of you here today. I think one of the things that we really noted was, and we're not saying that colleagues are not doing this already, but I think there is more to be done to try to consider the sort of the language that we're using when we communicate about copyright and licensing to our academic colleagues. I think we've got a really important role here to sort of pick through and help them understand what the terminology means. And also, I think a bigger challenge is really around what our institutional policies say, open access, particularly on intellectual property, and encouraging publishing, so that we're aligning that, so that authors are encouraged to retain their rights to use open licensing. I think there's still quite a lot that could be done in that area.
And we looked at some recommendations for academic authors, obviously understanding the importance of retaining copyright and sufficient rights. We're asking them to engage with publishers to explain policies on copyright, and to express them in ways that they actually can understand. I mean, as Jane mentioned, when we looked at it, we found it quite difficult to understand what those policies were saying, and we're copyright and licensing geeks, so for people for whom this is an aspect of what they do, I think there's a certain sense where they say, well, if their publishers are working on their behalf, they should be able to explain how it's actually working. Request copyright and licensing conditions specified by the publisher, by the funder, sorry, when publishing. But this final one here about those journal editors, again, really having quite a lot of power in this situation, and to say to the publisher, how are they making these policies clear and in line with the direction of scholarly communication more broadly. There were some things, weren't there, that if this research is to continue, we might look into.
Some of the differences maybe were between subject disciplines, which were noticeable when looking at journal policies as well. Some of the differences between the sciences and arts and humanities. I think perhaps understanding a bit about why publishers are using certain much more restrictive CC licenses. We did also note that there was potentially some discrepancies between the information that was in the DOJ data set and the information that might be provided on publishers' websites and also in author contracts. And it's just to kind of clarify as well, we didn't go into collecting contracts that authors sign, and I think that would be another quite a large piece of work that might be worthwhile doing, because obviously those documents are pretty critical. We were looking at them at a sort of higher level, and where there was a generic standard one available, certainly we did look at it, but because those are sent out often by journals, it was quite hard to do that.
I think the last 2 points really taking into account the fact that this is a very fast moving space, and clearly publishers are, they may be resistant, but they will be making changes. We did ask that question, what changes were they likely to make? Some of them said we're planning on reviewing policies, but some said they weren't planning on reviewing their policies or making any changes at all, which we found quite surprising, because clearly the world is changing. And again, that piece about transformative agreements and understanding a bit more what's actually happening in practice, I think is an important part of the mix as the impact of Plan S really starts to be seen, the consequences of those changes. So Spark Europe are doing more work, aren't they, Jane?
They are, yes. The rights retention campaign will be sort of kicking off next year. Do you want to say a bit more about that, Chris?
Yeah, so they are advocating for change. I think this relates to the Plan S rights retention strategy, but it's also talking more broadly about this being picked up and looking at institutions as well, of what they're doing. So very interesting to see Edinburgh's change in policy, but they'll be addressing this for academic authors throughout Europe and funders. So I think they are saying, Vanessa and Ignacy would very much want us to say, look at what's this space, look at what Spark Europe are doing, because they are clearly very active here in trying to move forward the open access agenda. But I think, despite the fact that we said there were certain limitations in the study, I think it actually gives a really good understanding, baseline of where we stand at the moment and how much work there is to be done.
Yeah, so just popped into the chat if you've got any questions. There is a dedicated email address, copyright@sparkeurope.org. If you read in the report and things occur to you, please do send questions and feedback. I think we've got literally a couple of minutes, haven't we, here, if anyone wants to ask anything now, though.
We're here, happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have just a wee kind of observation. It was great to see the research, both, thank you. But I found it interesting under further investigation. It was why publishers use certain types of CC licenses, because I found it very interesting in relation to the legacy. You know, the kind of policies, how they were predominantly using just the CC BY, but it showed, or illustrated rather, how the share alike license as well, how that's kind of, it doesn't seem to be kind of commonly used. I understand there's, you know, there can be the kind of challenges in trying to interpret the share alike aspect of Creative Commons, but no, it's just more of a kind of comment in relation to the types of CC licenses. That's all. I find that interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think the share alike isn't that well understood, and I think publishers, as our perception, we don't know, either flip between the fully open because they have to, or the more closed because what they want to do is that there's a concern about what happens and what the impact might be of going fully open, so they choose the more closed one. And the share alike ones are much more about, I think they're used by open advocates that want to retain the openness and don't want, obviously, the material to be further enclosed in a proprietary way. So yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much for having us, and yeah, happy reading if you haven't yet had a look at the report.
Thank you very much, Jane and Chris. That was really interesting, and if anyone does have more questions, please do contact Jane and Chris and with those questions and feedback. I guess it's just my job today to sort of wrap things up. We've had a really interesting morning, and I think some of the topics have really dovetailed quite well together. I want to say a big thank you to all our speakers, to Jane and Chris, to Fred, Theo, and to David for taking the time to bring such interesting topics to everyone's attention today. I also want to say thank you to everyone for coming along today to listen to what we had to say. One thing I will say is to those people on the call who are in SCURL institutions, a very small group of us have organised this event today. So Greg Walters from University of Glasgow has been behind the scenes doing all the technical things and making sure everything runs smoothly. Jill Daly from SCURL has been involved in obviously getting all the registration and things done and promoting the event, and along with myself and Greg, Eugene Stoic has also been instrumental in pulling together what we hope has been a really interesting panel of speakers today. But we are a small group, and it would be great if those at SCURL member institutions would like to join our small group, because it could really help expand the kind of topics we can bring to people in future. So if that's of interest, we do have our SCURL legal and copyright issues JISC mail group, and get in touch that way. I don't know if anyone has any other further comments. If not, then we can stop the recording, and that's really, I think, all I wanted to say for today.